Hi everyone, I'm Renee Tobin. Today our special guest is Bruce Collingwood, the senior leader of the Oasis Church. Bruce is also the leader of the Napier Ministers Network in Napier City, New Zealand. Recently, Bruce and his senior leadership team made a decision to make evangelization of the world the priority of their church. I'm interviewing Bruce today because I want to know and to share with you all his journey as a pastor, which brought him and his church to this place. Welcome, Bruce.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thank you for coming. Great to have you here.
Great.
Bruce, how long have you been a pastor and what is your church like?
Well, I've been a pastor for over 20 years. I started as a youth pastor in South Auckland for a year. I did 5 years as a youth pastor in Hamilton, and then came down to Napier City to plant the church that I'm currently leading, the Oasis Church, which happens to be an Elim church as well.
Right. Fantastic.
And the church itself is made up of all people from all walks of life. It's a multicultural church. We have people from lots of different cultures coming as well, and subcultures as well. I personally believe it's a good reflection of our community that we live in. And we're probably between 100 and 120 people that gather together as a church community.
Bruce, you've made a decision to make evangelization of the world the priority of your church, and you want your leadership and all your church members to be doing evangelism regularly. What brought you to this place?
Ultimately, I've always known that evangelism is important for Christians and for churches.
Yes.
But more recently again, when I read the Gospels, I really see that Jesus' mission when he came to earth was to he really came to save the world, and really I couldn't get away from the fact that the Gospels talk about reaching lost people for Jesus Christ. He worked miracles, but many people came to know him through that. And also when I look at the early church in the book of Acts, again, you see, thousands of people came to know Christ as the church expanded and grew. So when I read the Gospels, when I see the book of Acts, I see that evangelism was actually the priority. And I've come to the point now where I believe that it's actually the blueprint for the New Testament church. And so for me, it's actually about obedience to the Great Commission. Whether I'm an evangelist or not an evangelist, whether I'm so long as I'm a believer in Christ, that it is actually a primary responsibility that I need to do. And as a leader of a church, I see even more so that I need to have a responsibility to lead my church in that way.
Fantastic. If the evangelization of the world is the priority of the church, why do you think leaders of the Western Church don't know this?
I actually think that the leaders of the churches do know this. I think there are some realities, and anyone who's been a pastor for a while, as I have been, will know that these are realities that we live with. Church life is actually very busy, and it's very easy to get sidetracked into good things that aren't the primary thing. And so busyness is actually one of the main things I think that actually gets church leaders off track from that primary task of evangelism. I actually also think that fear is a major hurdle that not only believers but pastors also have to face when it comes to doing evangelism. I know in my own life I still struggle with fear as well, and I have to make a conscious choice to activate faith every time I engage with a non-believer, because fear is something that holds us back. And I kind of think about the political correctness that's been brought into this country over many years, and how really we're taught through political correctness that we have to believe what they want us to believe and say what they want us to say, and almost get brought into silence in that way. When we want to speak about our faith, we get fearful to say anything, and so I think that's one of those things as well. Also, I think people get comfortable. It's very easy, especially when you get to a church of a certain size, just to be comfortable with nice people, with nice things. Reaching lost people's hard work. and you're dealing with broken lives and broken people, and so. But I think there's a temptation just to get comfortable and to relax in the call of God rather than really advance God's kingdom like He's told us to. And one other thing would be that I believe that there's a huge misunderstanding on what actually evangelism is. And even in my own life in the last 12 months, I've actually had evangelism clarified, and that's really helped me sharpen what I need to do based on the fact that now I have a clear understanding of what evangelism actually is.
What's your understanding of evangelism now, and what did it used to be?
Well, to be honest with you, I hadn't probably given it the time to really get a good, clear definition and really sharpen what evangelism was from a biblical perspective. So I would have thought that, giving out food parcels and helping the poor and all of that would have been evangelism as well. But I've since come to understand that actually evangelism is only spreading or proclaiming the words of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that all these other things we do help in the process of evangelism, but actually evangelism itself is spreading or proclaiming the words of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that sharpens it for me and makes it clear what I'm about and where I'm going. Yes.
So those other things you're saying, like giving food parcels and our social action and good works we do, are actually a work of the gospel, but not the words of the gospel.
Absolutely. So a work of the gospel and words of the gospel are two different things. And they do complement each other, but we've got to be clear that evangelism is actually the words of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yes, because this is a misunderstanding we've had, and why a lot of us haven't been doing evangelism, because we thought we were with just the works of the gospel, but in actual fact we weren't doing it.
Absolutely.
We weren't doing the words of the gospel. We've come to understand that there's three different aspects to the gospel. There's the works of the gospel, the effects of the gospel, and the words of the gospel.
Yeah, absolutely. And so even in my own journey, I really didn't have that clear myself, which, I had the same misunderstanding that I'm sure a lot of pastors have, and a lot of believers have, and obviously we think we're doing the right thing, but it's really important to clarify exactly what evangelism is.
And that's the great thing that we've discovered in the last year and the last 3 years on this journey of evangelism, actually the correct understanding on the three different aspects of the gospel.
That's right.
So we have the works of the gospel, which would be like praying for someone, the effects of the gospel, which is someone receiving healing from the prayer, but they still haven't heard the words of the gospel.
Yes, exactly.
Which is the content of the words of the gospel message.
Absolutely.
Yes. Bruce, do you think pastors and leaders, that they just don't know it's a priority, or that they know but they find it too hard?
As I said before, I believe every pastor knows that evangelism is important. Deep down, we all know that. I know in my own journey, I've always known that evangelism is important. But because of busyness, as I said also before, busyness is a factor that you just get so sidetracked into doing everything else and juggling the balls of ministry. There's so many different things that are good things, and it's really hard to keep on top of all the different things that you have to do.
Right.
And so I think that's one of the things that actually causes people to be, off track in that whole area. But so pastors know that it's important, but things do sidetrack us from getting into that important thing.
Why did you not make it the priority of your church earlier in your ministry, Bruce?
For me, it personally was that I really was seriously struggling to do everything that needed to be done in the life of a church, and evangelism was just another thing I had to try and fit in.
Right.
And until I really did some strategic leadership and actually offloaded some things I needed to offload, I wasn't able to give the energy to evangelism that I needed to. So deep down, I knew that evangelism was important. I always have known that. And I'm sure other pastors struggle with this too, is that it's just in the too hard basket sometimes. You've got so many different things you have to look after in a church life, and to prioritise evangelism is actually quite difficult to do. I'm apostolic by gifting, and not actually evangelist primarily, but I also employed a fivefold ministry evangelist to help me prioritise evangelism, and that's actually you.
Good choice. Bruce, how did your journey in evangelism start, and what were the crucial turning points along the way?
Yeah, it was probably about 7 years ago now, I realised that I was struggling to prioritise the important things. And I took some time out with God, and I felt God say to me very clearly that I needed to, the way I would describe it is to get all the monkeys off my back.
Right.
And actually to delegate and offload all the things that I didn't need to be doing, to actually focus on the things that God really had called me to. And it came down to 4 things that I needed to prioritise, and that was vision,
yes,
as number 1, leadership development as number 2, number 3 was preaching and teaching,
yes,
and number 4 was reaching the lost. And everything else, I had to go through a process of 7 years of slowly offloading things like administration, finance, buildings, building management, all of that. I had to offload all of that, find people that were capable and able to do those things, so that I could primarily focus on these things that God wanted me to do. And that was you've got to start at some point. You can't keep just thinking about doing it. You've got to actually start, and you've got to start offloading the things that other people can do, so you can focus on what God wants you to do.
And so how did that impact or start the journey of you, actually the turning point for you in evangelism?
So obviously one of the 4 things God wanted me to do was reach the lost. So one of the first things I did is actually went from 5 days a week on salary at the church to 4 days a week, on purpose, so that I could get out into the community, to start rubbing shoulders with people that don't know Jesus, and actually being able to start reaching them. But obviously we had to find a way to bring evangelism as a priority in our church. And so one of the ladies in our church, a lady called Gail, went to one of the ESI seminars,
yes,
and in Waipukurau, and came back very excited about what she'd learnt, and it really just was the perfect timing, because I'd already been thinking about how to prioritise evangelism in our church.
yes,
and so from there I watched the 41-minute video clip on the ESI website, and which talked all about how evangelism is important, and that we need to be prioritising that. One of the things that really shocked me in that time was when I found out that only 2% of believers in the Western world were actively proclaiming or spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ. 2%. And I knew that I was one of the 98% actually.
yes,
And I wasn't one of the 2. And I was shocked at the statistics for the New Zealand church, and realised that I had to do something about that for my own life and for the church that I lead, to be responsible before God.
Yeah, brilliant.
So then I actually got a hold of you and asked you to come and speak to my senior leadership team, and because obviously it's not something that I can just lead on my own. I need my whole senior leadership team on the same page, all focused on the same vision and mission to evangelise our community. And so that was some of the process.
How did you get to hear about, I think you said you rang Julian, and so how did you get to hear about me, that I work with Evangelise Strategies International, we say ESI for short,
Right.
that I was working with Julian as his assistant leader, and I could come and talk to you and your senior leadership about what your evangelism strategies were and how we can help you,
Yes.
and what our one-day conference offers you.
That's right.
And what the 28 strategies we have to follow the conference, and how they can maintain evangelism momentum in your church. How did Julian tell you that I could come and talk to you?
Yes. So I did actually miss out that point is that I actually did get a hold of Julian and had a chat with him on the phone after Gail came back from the seminar, and that got the whole ball rolling. And,
how was that beneficial to you and your senior leadership team that evening when I did come and talk to you?
Oh, absolutely, imperative. It's just because ultimately, you've got to have somebody that's a vision carrier for what you're trying to communicate. And, you being an evangelist are a vision carrier.
Yes.
And so, because it's not about what's taught necessarily, it's actually what's caught.
Yes.
More importantly, it's what's caught. So for me to have my senior leadership team catch the importance of evangelism, I needed a fivefold ministry evangelist who was carrying the vision of evangelism to come and teach about it, but also let my leadership team catch it in their spirit as well.
Right, and they did.
And they did.
And they did that evening.
Yeah. So that was fantastic. Very good step in the right direction.
Yes. And from there, you went to, you watched the 41-minute video clip, which summarises and goes through the theology and the philosophy of ESI, biblical philosophy.
That's
and
right.
then you said you showed that to your church?
Yes, I showed it first to my senior leadership team, and then one Sunday we actually, instead of a sermon, we the whole church. Because obviously the next step after you get your senior leadership team on board is you've got to actually sow the vision to the rest of the church of the importance. They've got to understand the theology and the importance of evangelism in God's eyes.
Yes.
And so that was a perfect way to introduce it to the church.
And that's where the education really began for the church.
Absolutely.
Wasn't it?
And I noticed after we played that clip, I had 3 of my seasoned leaders that we were coming up to Christmas, and they were just sort of a bit bored and thinking, just another year. But after they saw that clip, suddenly the lights went on, and I could see that they came up to me after the service and said, yes, it feels like this is what we were born to do, and not just another year. This is going to be something dynamic that we're going into next year. And it really hit something in their spirit. I think secretly, every believer and every pastor knows that we should be prioritising evangelism, but we justify why we don't do it, and we probably feel guilty that we don't do it.
Right.
So when this gave permission for my people to actually go, yes, we can now do what we're supposed to be doing as New Testament believers.
And that is exciting, because you do feel whole, and you do feel, because I think, like you said, it's a desire of every Christian to want to be able to share their faith.
Absolutely.
But we just haven't been equipped to do so this was a good starting point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What happened next? You got me to come and preach on a Sunday?
Yes, so after we played the video clip to the church, the next step was to actually get you in. In fact, I think I got Julian in, was it before you, or no, you came in first,
Yes.
Is that right? So I got you in first, and you preached in our Sunday service, and then by then we'd planned a conference, ESI seminar, and Julian came for that one, trained all our people on the Saturday, and then preached in the church on the Sunday.
What was really interesting is the uniqueness of the ESI ministry is we have 3 phases. The first phase is we prepare the church for evangelism. So that's where education begins on what is evangelism, what it's not, what is the gospel and what it's not. Is the Bible our final authority? Are we all meant to be commissioned with the Great Commission? Are we all meant to, with the Great Commission? And so it's getting rid of all the wrong mindsets and thinking. So that's preparing the church for evangelism. The second phase is doing the evangelism training. So that's where we look at the gospel, the content of the gospel message. We look at tools and resources we can use to spread and proclaim the gospel. And then the third phase is maintaining the evangelism momentum. Because it's very easy to go to one of these one-day conference or any one-day conference, and you're all fired up and you come back, but nothing actually progresses from there. So we have 28 strategies that we implement to maintain evangelism momentum. And what was interesting is normally in the past we have run the one-day conference, and then after that we start the evangelism training. But one thing I love about Bruce is he makes decisions, and it's just the follow-on effect of what I've seen here is Bruce and his senior leadership team then decided they would hold our 12 Truths evangelism conference. So this decision was being made at the beginning of this year, but because Bruce was away on a 5-week mission trip and we had other conferences we were running, he couldn't put it until June the 6th. So he said, well, Renee, what's stopping you starting the evangelism training now? So I actually started, so Bruce and his senior leadership team employed me as their in-house evangelist for 2 years. So I started at the beginning of this year, and they employed me to come here the first Tuesday of every month and run evangelism training. So I started in February.
Yeah.
And I used to, when I didn't have commitments at my own church, I used to pop up here for church because I really saw the strength of getting to know the people at Oasis and starting to build some relationship and friendship with the people here. So I had done 5 months of evangelism training, 5 weeks of those, or a couple of those lessons when Bruce wasn't even here. He was overseas on a missions trip. And it was wonderful because I started to get to know the people, started to share about what evangelism was and what it looked like and how to do it. So by the time it came to the one-day evangelism conference, your people were sort of like had a foot in the door.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, instead of it all being very new to them, they were like, I've got a little bit of this, I'm there. Whereas 3 years ago, I went to this evangelism conference, the very first one that Julian Batcher, the founder and leader of Evangelism Strategies International, ran. And I came out of that conference at the end of the day and I thought, do you know what? I didn't even know what evangelism meant. In fact, I didn't even know what the gospel was, the content of the gospel message. I can't explain sin, or I'm not comfortable talking about hell or judgment or justice or even explaining God's grace, actually. And I thought, do you know what, I've been a Christian 15 years. And I just thought, what a fraud of a Christian I am. After 15 years, and I can't objectively communicate my faith. So I sort of snuck home and thought, what am I going to do about this? And I thought, well, I'm going to ask some of my friends what they think. And do you know what? Other than 3 of my Christian friends, we were all in the same boat. New Zealand's or statistics in the West are that 98% of Christians are not sharing their faith. And I thought I was one of those 98%. So I thought, okay, well, what am I going to do about this? So I thought, right, I'll go back to the drawing board. So I opened the Word of God and I thought, well, if I want to know what sin is, just see what God says. And Paul said very clearly in Romans 7:7, if you want to know what sin is, look at the law. So then I looked at what the law was, and it's the 10 Commandments. You break God's moral 10 Commandments, well, that is what sin is. And then I looked at judgment, and in Hebrews it says we're appointed to die once and we're going to be judged. So I thought, Renee, get over yourself. Judgment is going to happen when we die. And God said in Psalms that he's known by his justice, so he is a just God. So I started to get comfortable with all these things. And then my pastor asked me if I'd be the evangelism leader of our church. That's St Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Waipukurau. My minister's name is Ian Pym. And I said yes. So basically I just started teaching. I was basically one step ahead. I learned something and then I taught it. So that's sort of where I stepped into the Oasis Church.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to sort of, for pastors particularly, to understand if you're going to prioritise something, you've got to put money behind it, and you've got to put somebody that's going to front that ministry. So if we were serious about making evangelism a priority in our church, it didn't take rocket science to figure out we had to actually employ an evangelist to actually equip the saints for the task, which is what the fivefold ministry is all about.
Because a lot of people say to me, "Oh, Renee, well, this is just easy for you. You're an evangelist, and so you're gifted for this to spread and proclaim the gospel and go and talk to people." And I go, well, "You're correct, but actually, my job is twofold. 50% of it is to do exactly that, and the other 50% is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. So my job is to be in churches,
That's right,
equipping you all to go and do the work."
Absolutely. And another thing that's important is that we actually, it was quite strategic that we got you on board for 2 years. And one of the goals that we gave you is that we needed to identify our own evangelism points person from our own church that could walk alongside you and learn everything you know. And God's been good to us, and this year we have identified that person who will now be working with you next year for that second year and learning everything you know, so that we don't lose the evangelism passion and momentum that we've got, that we can keep on sustaining it into the future as well. Because ultimately after your 2 years you'll be going off to other churches and doing it in other churches, and we've got to be able to keep it going by having our own evangelism points person burning that fire of evangelism in our church all the time.
And what's interesting about that is you employed me to be your in-house evangelist till you found your own in-house one.
Right.
And what I've noticed, because it's what's happened with me, is I had no idea I was an evangelist. And so it wasn't until I sat underneath another evangelist and studied the gospel and learned how to proclaim and share the gospel that it ignited something in me.
Yeah.
And so that's what's happened for Kevin Simpson,
Yes.
who now is your evangelism point person for Oasis, who we're going to be working together next year.
Yeah.
That happened for him as he sat in the classes and sat under my ministry as an evangelist, or my gifting as an evangelist, that it birthed something in him, because he had no idea, did he?
No, he didn't have any idea, but obviously over this year we've seen, obviously he got activated in evangelism, and he became quite consistent and regular at sharing his faith.
Yes.
And you could just see the gift of evangelism starting to mature in his life as he honed that skill.
Right.
And I can see big things for him in next year as he continues to grow in that gifting.
The monthly evangelism training for the whole church. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that, and then I can...
Well, again, we realised that we have to really be strategic about this. Again, evangelism isn't something that Christians do quickly. Although they know it's important, there's lots of reasons why not to do it. And so we realised that we had to actually prioritise evangelism in the whole church by putting on a church-wide evangelism training meeting once a month. And I even encouraged all our life groups not to have their life groups on that week.
That's right.
And actually close down all the life groups on that week of every month and prioritise getting their people and themselves to the evangelism training. And obviously every month that we've had it, we've had people learning and getting switched on to the importance of evangelism. So it's been very important to have that regular training.
And were you pleased with the topics covered at the evangelism training?
Absolutely. You're probably better to sort of explain what we covered, but I'm very, very happy. We covered apologetics, and we covered some really key questions that non-believers might ask. We clarified evangelism. There's many things that have already been taught that have been, absolutely crucial for our people to learn. So it's been great.
I've got a wee selection here. The evangelism training. It's interesting that we actually have to be trained in evagelism.
Yeah.
That it virtually doesn't come naturally to us. And people have sort of said to me, "Oh, Renee, there's just so much to learn, and I don't know if I can do it all, and it's hard and things like that." But I say to people, to be fair, we're not equipped in being able to share the gospel message because we've never been trained in it.
Right.
In churches' discipleship programs, they cover just about everything else, but not how to objectively communicate our faith.
Yeah.
So we study, how to read the Bible, about the Holy Spirit, how to pray, worship, etc., but never, virtually never, on how to communicate objectively our faith.
And I think part of the problem is that a lot of Christians and church leaders don't actually know the clear definition of evangelism.
Yes.
That's the whole reason it gets blurred.
Yes.
Once they know that clear definition, then obviously they see the need to train their people in that.
Yes, a good point, because you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
Yes. Okay, well, with the evangelism training, so it was the first Tuesday of every month, and do you know what? It's a fun night. You know, it's inspiring, it's empowering, and deep inside every Christian, we all want to be able to share our faith. And so there's sort of a level of excitement at the evangelism classes because you think, oh my gosh, I'm going to learn how to do it. And for, you know, my family member or my friend or the stranger I meet, I'm going to be able to share who Jesus is and the great hope that he brings. So the first thing we do in evangelism classes is we have a really good look at the gospel message. And we have a look at the words of the gospel message. So we study the 4 essential content areas of the gospel. So they are the gospel message. They are why we need to be saved, how Jesus can save us, what we've got to do to be saved, and the cost of becoming a disciple. So we spent a lot of time on that content area, didn't we?
Yeah, that's right.
So why we need to be saved. This is what non-Christians ask us. Well, how come I need to be saved? And so we've got to be able to have an answer for that. But what I really encourage everyone to do at evangelism classes is learn it for themselves first. You're not learning it to convince someone else. What do you think? Why do you think we need to be saved? How does Jesus save us? What have we got to do to be saved? Do you know? Do you know that we need to turn and surrender? For us to be forgiven, we need to admit that we are a sinner. We need to turn away from those things that we know are wrong. It's not going to make us perfect. We're not going to be perfect, but we've got to turn away from those things that offend God. And we've got to surrender and then explain what that means. So we spent a lot of time in all those categories.
Yeah.
And it was just, people just loved it. They said, you know what, I didn't know that. I hadn't thought about that before. Then we looked at resources, tools and resources we can use to spread and proclaim the gospel. And we studied these and we role-played these a lot. So I wouldn't have got started in evangelism, and I wouldn't still be doing it today, and I wouldn't be able to teach it without tools and resources. They're absolutely crucial. So we have a selection of tracts, and tracts are printed material with the gospel message on them. We have a selection of 3 here. You know, if you did die tonight, are you going to heaven? The test, and here's one setting us up for the new year, New Year's resolution. These are from Matt Old and his team, Gospel Outreach New Zealand. And then we have a comic one here that's put out by Outreach Today and our great Ray Comfort, who is in New Zealand but now living in America. And then we have our famous Bible in 11 cards. It's got lots of different colours. Now these cards are my favourite, and they're well known throughout New Zealand now and used a lot. And on these cards is a web address, www.bible11.com. And on that web address is an 11-minute gospel message. And so people can take this little card, they can go and look up the web address on their iPhone, they can take it home and look it up on their computer. Or if I'm with someone, I can play it to them on my iPhone or my iPad just with them.
That's right.
And people love these. So we role play using these. You know, we've even got to go right back to the beginning of how to start conversations with non-Christians and how to bridge from natural conversation onto spiritual matters. But this is all learned. This is all learned. So we do that, and we also have that Bible 11 on a DVD here. And then because this Bible 11 video gospel message is just the bones of the gospel message, we also have a follow-up booklet here, How to Be Sure Going to Heaven When We Die. And what that does is it fleshes out the 11 minutes. So people that we share the gospel with that we can see would like to know more information, we pass this on to them. For example, I stayed at the Queen and King Hotel. It's a beautiful 5-star boutique hotel in the weekend. And I was talking to the housekeeping staff next door to the room I was staying in. And I shared this, the Bible 11 video with them. And the lady said, you know, Renee, I tried to read the Bible, but I just found it all really confusing and I couldn't understand it, and I've really been thinking about faith, you know, with Christmas coming up, and so I explained to her why probably she couldn't understand the Bible when she read it, and I was able to give her this follow-up booklet so she could go. So what this does, this book is in 3 thirds. The first third goes over why we need to be saved, or why we need to be forgiven. The middle section is how we are forgiven, And the third section is life being forgiven. So life as a Christian. And non-Christians love this and Christians love it. Well, other things we cover, we look at the 6 most commonly asked questions, like what about all the different faiths? Why does God allow suffering? How do we know the Bible's true? If God's so loving, why did he create a place like hell? So for each of those subjects, we'd spend one evening on them. And once again, I tell people, don't learn this to convince someone else, learn it for yourself. What do you think about all the different faiths, etc., etc.? So it's great. A lot of discussion happens in the classes. We go over and over things because it takes us a long time. And because of these topics, we talk about hell. What is hell like? I teach, 4 facts about hell. These are subjects that we haven't liked to talk about. And so as we talk about them more, they're not so foreign to us and we get more comfortable with it. We share evangelism testimony time. They're always fun, aren't they, Bruce? At the beginning of each evangelism training, we share our testimony from the last month. So over the month, everyone's goal is to be able to spread or proclaim the gospel at least once a week. So people come to class and they go, me, I did it, yay! It's really fun. Or they might just talk about how they went out to try and they couldn't do it, they chickened out. But this is all part of the process. It's the fact that proclaiming, sharing the gospel or spreading the gospel is now on our radar. We're looking for opportunities, we're thinking about it, we've got some tools to use to do it.
Yeah, that's right.
We look at Genesis 3 and the fall and the consequences from these choices. That's a big one. People have got to be able to understand where sin came from and how the world is in this position today. So yes, that's sort of a bit of a roundup of the classes on a Tuesday night.
Yeah, that's right.
And we have great feedback from them.
And every time those training nights are held, you can see more people in the church getting activated for evangelism. Yeah, it's just like revelation. You just see the lights coming on, and people, each time it happens, there's more people getting activated.
Yes. Which
ultimately we're trying to mobilise the whole church to be activated, and not just evangelists. And I think that's one of the lies that we need to dispel. Is in church we've got to get away from the fact that we just put evangelism to evangelists.
Yes.
We have to have every believer, every New Testament church and every New Testament believer needs to be spreading the gospel. Everybody. And so we've got to mobilise the whole church.
That's another area of education, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We have to share the difference between an evangelist and an evangelizer. I'm an evangelist, but we've been all called to be evangelizers.
Absolutely.
To take the good news of Jesus Christ to people.
Very important.
Yes.
Because I think for too long people have just said, oh, well, that's in the too hard basket, we'll just leave that to the evangelists. And it can't be that way. It has to be all believers getting activated.
Yes, God commissioned the Great Commission to all his disciples.
Absolutely.
And we are all his disciples, so the commission is to us all.
Absolutely.
Yes. Bruce, what difference has making the evangelization of the world the priority in your church had on your church? What's changed? This is a biggie.
Yes.
Yes, and exciting.
It's basically, it's made Christianity exciting again. You know, when you have young people and new Christians in a church, you've got life.
Yes.
And I've just noticed that every time somebody gets saved, there's an excitement in the church that wasn't there before. People get a joy deep down in their spirit about that new life and that new birth. And it reminds people what it's like to be born again and to come to Christ, and I think it just excites people in a whole fresh way. Gives people a sense of purpose. Why do we go to church? Why are we actually part of a church? We've got a reason to be part of it now, to advance God's kingdom in this earth. We're not just here to gather together once a week for no reason in particular apart from fellowship. We are actually here to advance God's kingdom. It gives people a strategic focus in living, having a future and having a purpose.
So even though evangelism is not to be equated with the winning of souls, which you just sort of said at the beginning, and that's one of the misconceptions that we've had, and one thing we've had to get re-educated on, because people think that evangelism is the winning of souls.
Right.
But that's incorrect. Evangelism is just spreading or proclaiming the gospel message.
Yes.
But it's a wonderful fruit that you're seeing.
It's the fruit, you're absolutely right. So evangelism is spreading or proclaiming the words of the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's all it is. But the fruit of it is you get to see new life, and that brings excitement into people. And when people get activated in evangelism, you just see them spark up on the inside and something change. Yeah. And
you definitely see that, and people have commented on it within the church, like they're noticing that there's life in the church. You know, that the people doing evangelism have just got life in them.
Yeah, that's right.
A freedom and a wholeness that just wasn't there before.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are some of the other things that you've noticed from making evangelism the priority of your church?
Like I've said, there's clear purpose, there's a growth in faith.
So when you talk about clear purpose, when it is the priority, well, that's like your main mission. So it's very clear on where you're going.
Yeah, it's very clear.
In the direction.
Very clear for the whole church. So nobody's confused about why we're gathering as a church.
Yes.
Everybody knows why we're gathering.
Yes.
And it's a team talk to go out into the community to spread and proclaim the gospel of Jesus to people that don't know God.
Fantastic. And what about church growth? It's making evangelization of the world the priority of your church. That's had a impact on your church growth.
Absolutely. This year, we can only look at it from this year so far, but in this year we've gone from being plateaued as a church at 80 people for the last 6 or 7 years to now being up to 120 people in 1 year. So something's changed, and it's not a coincidence that it happens to be that we've prioritised evangelism. And now we're starting to see church growth, and real church growth, not just shuffling the pack of transfer growth or taking advantage of somebody else's misfortune where they have a church split and you pick up people. I'm talking about real church growth where people are finding Jesus Christ.
Genuine church
growth, which is what every pastor and every believer actually wants deep down.
So you've actually led about 7 people to the Lord through showing them the Bible in 11 gospel presentation just in the last few months.
Yeah.
How's that happen, and how do you do it?
Yeah, well, one of the key elements for me is that we run a cafe in our church, and which is on three mornings a week at this stage. And one of the things I did is I prioritised, rather than just sort of stopping for 15 minutes for morning tea, I decided I would stop for 45 minutes and actually use that time to mix and mingle with all the people that come to the cafe. And the beauty of the cafe is it's not just full of people that go to your church, but it's their friends, and it's their the people that they know that they invite to the cafe.
Right.
So while I'm having morning tea, I'm getting to mix and mingle with all of these non-believers as well as people from the church, and it's quite often something deep will come up, and I'll say, look, I'm just finishing my morning tea, but after that, if you want to talk more about this, come and see me in my office.
Right.
And they've been able to come down to my office. I start the conversation by showing them the Bible in 11. I say, look, I've got an 11-minute presentation on video that I'd like to show you. Would you be open to seeing that? I haven't been turned down yet, and at the end of it, I've been able to talk it through a little bit more and actually lead them through to salvation right there in my office.
So a lot of people have said about the Bible 11 video that they feel it's a bit aggressive and a bit upfront. And what's been your experience with the people that have seen it, and how they responded to that?
Well, I know there's lots of thoughts around it, but I personally, the reality is people can argue about it or question it, but let's look at the fruit. And the fruit is that, I can personally say that in the last 4 months, God has used me to lead 7 people to a personal relationship with God through Jesus Christ just by looking at that Bible in 11
Yes.
presentation. So the proof is in the fruit, not in
Yes.
the theories that people have, but in the fruit, and the fruit is good, is all I can say.
Fantastic. And I know from when I've shown the Bible 11 gospel message to people, they love it. It's clear, the graphics are excellent, and they get an understanding. They go, gosh, at long last, I understand what you Christians believe.
Yeah.
They might not necessarily like it, but they understand it. And from there, they can ask questions about it.
And I think the crucial thing is there that then God can actually work on the seed that's been planted in their heart
Yes.
and grow that seed. Without that, they can't. There's nothing to grow.
Yes, exactly. The seed's in there. And I love that. I love in John 16:8 where he says the Holy Spirit was given to bring conviction, bring guilt in regard to sin, righteousness and judgment.
Yeah.
So the Holy Spirit can get to work.
That's right.
Bruce, it's easy to run a seminar on evangelism and to see people fired up, but what about maintaining evangelism momentum? We've given you 28 strategies to implement. How have these helped you maintain evangelism momentum?
Yeah, obviously, some crucial things we've already talked about is we employed you as our fivefold ministry evangelist to front up and actually lead our church in evangelism. That's been crucial. The monthly training's been crucial. But one of the things that you did, which is really important, is you came up with an evangelism year planner, and which you and I discussed, and we put that plan into action,
Yes.
which included introducing an evangelism strategy into our church once a month. And so I think over this year we've introduced about 8 different strategies, one every month, to keep on building that momentum and
Yes.
focus for evangelism.
Because like anything, when we start something new, we've got to put strategies into place for action to happen.
Absolutely. Now, and one of the strategies we introduced was a Great Commission survey. And I just want to talk about this because I got personally challenged. I think it was Julian that actually said this to me. Do you keep a record and a graph of people that of attendance in your church? And I said, yes, of course we do. Every church does that. And then he said, do you actually graph how many dollars come in each week? And I said, yeah, well, every church does that. And in fact, our movement requires us to give an account for attendance and finance that comes in every month.
Yes.
And then Julian said to me, do you actually graph your Great Commission results? And I said, no. And he said, why not? And it got me thinking, and I realised if evangelism's important to Jesus, would Jesus be more interested in us graphing Great Commission results or finance and attendance? And I really realised that we're actually dropping the ball on this, and so we started to actually graph our Great Commission, our spreading and proclaiming the words of the gospel of Jesus. So every Sunday now we have an opportunity for people to turn over a Great Commission survey that we then graph, and we can keep a record of how many people in our church are actually active in evangelism.
Because you have a goal for everyone in your church to be active in evangelism. That means proclaiming or spreading the gospel once a week. So that's a goal, well then it can be measured.
That's
so
right, we have to measure the goal.
Yes.
And it sounds ambitious, but because I believe it's the New Testament model and blueprint for church, I believe that we have to mobilise 100% of our people to spread or proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ at least once a week. That's a huge goal, but it's what we're aiming for.
And this has certainly brought success, because we've learned that unless you implement these 28 strategies, well then you're not going to maintain evangelism momentum.
Absolutely. So some of the, in fact all the strategies we've introduced have been crucial. And each month it means we've got something new coming in. Another one that's really important that we just recently introduced was an evangelism notice board and table, a resource place for people to, as they walk in and out of church, to be able to be resourced with evangelism, to also see again another visual statement that says evangelism is a priority in this church.
And it looks great, very smart. Bruce, you're leading by example in evangelism, and so are all your other leaders. By leaders, do you mean, the board, the council, elders, deacons, ministry leaders, etc.? How is it that leaders of a church lead by example in evangelism? How important is it?
Well, really, my senior leadership team, I could not go down this track unless I had my senior leadership team on board. And I went to my senior leadership team and said, we have to be absolutely united on this. Every single one of us have to believe in our heart of hearts that this is the primary mandate of the New Testament church. And if we believe it, we have to action that, and we have to model that to our people, not just me as the senior leader, but the whole senior leadership team needs to model it. And so I've said to my senior leadership team, on the basis that we believe it's a priority, we don't have a choice. We have to do this once a week to model evangelism to our church. So no matter whether we're evangelistic in our gifting or unevangelistic, all my senior leadership team are committed to spreading or proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ every week. And that's important. And I also believe that all my other leaders, I've said to them quite clearly, if you don't lead in this, your people won't follow. It's as simple as that. People follow leaders.
And they've been really challenged to that, haven't they, and come to the evangelism training?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They've definitely felt challenged by that. So really, in summary, my senior leadership team have to.
Yes.
And my other leaders are highly encouraged to, because if they don't, their people won't follow.
Yes. Yeah, it's a leadership theory, isn't it?
Leadership theory.
Bruce, what difference has doing evangelism had on your own spiritual walk? How much of a challenge has it been for you to get up and get going in evangelism? Tell us some of your struggles on the journey.
Yeah, well, as I said, I still struggle with fear in regards to going out on the street. I do it very, very well in here when I have people come in the cafe and come and look at it on my computer and talk to them in my office. Very, very comfortable with that. But getting out on the street or sharing my faith publicly out there in the community, it still causes me fear. And I've realised that fear is the opposite of faith. And so if I'm going to be a believer, I can't be motivated by fear. I've got to be motivated by faith.
Yes.
And so I have to really take that fear captive and make it obedient to Christ. I've got to say, fear, you don't have control over me. And I'm going to walk in faith in what you've called me to do, God.
What do you think that fear was? What do you think
it's fear of rejection.
Yes.
It's fear of being mocked by people. That kind of thing. And again, I think it's not a small thing. I think the 20 or 30 years of political correctness in this country has really made us feel like we're going to be mocked if we speak up about our faith. And it's almost like a stronghold that we need to defeat.
Yes.
And I really believe that. But for me, again, pastors are busy people. And so if I don't prioritise it, it won't happen.
Yes.
So one of the things I've chosen to do, is I've put a reminder in my Google Calendar. And every Monday morning when I come into my office, I see on my Google Calendar, spread or proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I don't delete that out of my calendar until it's done.
Brilliant.
And so all week I see it every time I go to my Google Calendar, I see it there, and it's not deleted until I've done it. And that keeps me accountable to actually lead by example.
Yes.
And do this as a priority, even though I'm busy. And by the way, we can all make excuses about being busy. I can too.
Yes.
And so I've had to put measures on myself to make sure I hold myself accountable.
That's another strategy, isn't it?
It is.
The strategy of accountability.
Absolutely.
Bruce, how important has education been in your journey and the journey for your church? By this I mean educating all your people on what evangelism is and what it isn't, what the gospel is and what it isn't.
Yeah, I mean all of that is absolutely crucial. You see, if you want 100% of your people doing evangelism, you've got to get them to realise that even if they're introvert, even if they're shy people, they can still spread the gospel. They may not have the confidence to proclaim the gospel by opening their mouth, but they can spread the gospel. They can leave a card somewhere that points someone to the 11-minute gospel presentation. By doing that, they are actually spreading the gospel. Now that means you're activating your introverts and your shy people as well.
Yes.
To the point where, you know, they can go out with a hoodie on at night, at midnight, and sneak a card into someone's letterbox. They're still spreading the gospel. So, you know, there's no excuses now for believers to not actually spread or proclaim the gospel. You can activate everybody. And I think that's an important concept that we need to get across, that it makes it achievable for all believers, which is important. Now, we've got a guy in our church who's given out, I think, over 4,000 cards. And he's... This year.
Yes.
And he's got, you know, mental health issues and challenges. He just got activated in evangelism. I don't think he's proclaimed it, but he's spread the gospel 4,000 times. I mean, and he's a good example of somebody that you would not assume to be an evangelist, who would not be activated normally, but he's managed to get activated. And I believe it makes it achievable for everybody.
I was going to ask you, Bruce, in your opinion, is it possible to mobilise everyone in your church into that? What about the very old, the very poor, the mentally and physically challenged?
Exactly.
So you just answered that.
Answered that one.
Yes, so it's possible because the understanding of what evangelism is to spread or proclaim.
Right.
And now that we've got tools to spread the gospel, well, we can all be involved.
Absolutely.
But just coming back to that education, do you think you would be where you are in mobilising your church in evangelism without the education of the one-day seminar, the training?
No, I wouldn't be, because I would still be justifying all the good works I'm doing as evangelism.
Yes.
And I would be... It would be ignorance, but it would be a good justification. And the reality is now I can't make that excuse because I know clearly what evangelism is. And then that obviously educates my people the same way. So they realise that there's more to it than just good works. There's actually spreading or proclaiming the words.
Great. So one other thing, what about friendship evangelism, Bruce? You know, people said, oh, you just can't go up and, you know, share the gospel like that and go, you know, straight in with the gospel message. You've got to build friendship first and a relationship, etc. What's your stance on that and being your testimony of it?
I mean, I think obviously there's validity in friendship evangelism as well. There's you know, lots of people journey with people as well, but there's also many ways that you can evangelise. And I think that, you know, approaching people and giving them a card is actually quite non-threatening. You can even say to them, you know, you take this card and go home and in the privacy of your own home, have a look at this on your smartphone, on your tablet, on your laptop. They're not feeling like you're right in their face, you know, making them, pouncing on them. All you're doing is giving them a card that they can go away and in their own time, when they're feeling non-threatened, they can actually look at this site. I think it's a great way of doing it.
And what's interesting, when you actually start doing evangelism and you do go up to people and even complete strangers, that the fear that we all have of being rejected or about people being reactive to us, I've actually found 99% of the time they aren't, and they're actually really thankful that you've spoken to them.
Yeah.
So it's a misconception through us actually not really knowing. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And there's certain, you know, ways, questions you can ask that build curiosity rather than, you know, for instance, you know, if you died and were to stand before God, what would be 2 reasons why God would let you into heaven? That's a good question to ask people. Or go up to someone and say, could I ask you a really important question? You know, I mean, there's little ways you can do that where it builds curiosity rather than making people backtrack. Yes, very good. And that's what we've been role-playing and using. Yeah. It's been fun, hasn't it? It's been good. Yeah.